hear the term step up all the time in sports, meaning guys need to get better. They need to improve. They need to fill in for veteran players or guys that have moved on. And such is the case all over the place at Ohio State coming up this spring. We got Pat Murphy on the line for Bucknuts 247 Sports to help us break down the Bucks. Pat, how you doing today?
I'm good. Enjoying what kind of football offseason we have here and getting ready for spring practice. It's started to get a little warmer here in Columbus these last couple of days, which has been nice after quite a bit of snow and some real cold temperatures. So hopefully spring's on the way.
Absolutely. We're right there with you. It looks a lot warmer from the inside looking outside, but at least that means there are blue skies. So you get outside and a little bit brisk. But for mid to late February, I am definitely not complaining because it could be 20 or 25 degrees less.
Yeah.
Okay. When we look at the quarterback position, bam, that's the obvious. Who is going to step up in a big way to be able to take on the team that is considered the best in the Big Ten and a top 5 team in the country, despite having, I believe the statistic is, for the first time in about 50 years, no players back who threw a pass the previous season. So that quarterback battle is going to be something else.
Absolutely. And probably the biggest story of the offseason when it comes to Ohio State, and certainly up there in college football. Obviously replacing a guy like Justin Fields, who just 2 years ago was a Heisman Trophy finalist, and despite what you may hear from some NFL people right now, was a pretty good player for Ohio State, very good player. So the standard under Ryan Day is not going to drop. I don't think that they expect whoever wins this starting job, be it C.J. Stroud, Jack Miller, or freshman Kyle McCord, to play quite to Fields level out the gates. But the expectation for Ohio State quarterbacks is to come in and be in that Heisman conversation and lead your team to a Big Ten title and a college football playoff. So that's pretty high expectations for 3 guys that, as you mentioned, haven't thrown a collegiate pass between them. C.J. Stroud and Jack Miller at least have the benefit of both being in the system for a year, learning the playbook, seeing Justin Fields work. They did each get on the field in a couple games. Both got a rushing touchdown, but like I said, neither threw a pass. And Kyle McCord, a 5-star quarterback out of Philadelphia, Ryan Day probably could have gone after any quarterback in the country in this last recruiting cycle. He chose Kyle McCord. So there's clearly a reason there. But yeah, if we're talking about stepping up, one of these guys is going to need to. I think there's going to be a quarterback battle that's probably going to go all the way into fall camp and maybe late into fall camp, for a couple reasons. One, I think these guys are all probably pretty even. And, without any major experience, there's no, advantage to any of them right now. And 2, I think, and, no one's going to say this on the inside of the program, at least not publicly, but you want to make sure one of these guys doesn't decide to up and transfer before the start of the season. And, in today's transfer portal era, guys transfer even once the season starts, or at least enter the portal. But, with only 3 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster, I think you want to make sure you have all these guys engaged. So, even if, again, like I said, even if it won't be admitted publicly, I do think Ryan Day and the staff will probably let this go on as long as possible, just to keep guys engaged and make sure that all 3 of these guys feel like they have a shot until they absolutely need to make a decision, or it's just very clear. But yeah, those are 3 guys that are going to be very crucial for at least one of them to step up in a big way for Ohio State in 2021.
The voice of the Buckeyes, breaking down the Buckeyes here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. We lean on Pat Murphy on a regular basis, joins us to talk Ohio State football as spring practice approaches. Please like the videos, even if you don't agree with me and the analysis here. We discuss and debate every day. So you got to like that if you like college football and like Ohio State in particular. Hit that bell for the notifications once you have subscribed, because we go live just about every day and typically multiple times per day. So you got to keep track of that and join the discussion. When you say step up, and it's a cliche, but it's at the same time, it's true. It is looking for additional players to fill the void, to get better, to be big time players. I don't know that anybody stepped up like Trey Sermon did last year down the stretch for Ohio State, and now he's gone. Master Teague was pretty reliable from game to game, but maybe he's a guy that is going to need to fill a void, especially considering what you just outlined at the quarterback position. The running game is going to be at the forefront.
Yeah, and when I wrote about this earlier this week, both Master Teague and Marcus Crowley, who will be I believe a redshirt sophomore this year, he injured his knee 2 years ago in November, his freshman season, after playing pretty well, in limited carries, looking good, and didn't come back until the national championship game was the time we saw him late in that game and got a handful of carries there. Those are two guys that I think, if we're talking about returning guys, obviously Ohio State has two very talented freshman running backs coming in, but I didn't count those guys in the stepping up because we haven't seen them yet. But the running back room, you need, with a young quarterback, you need somebody to kind of take that load off. And those are two guys that could potentially do it. With Master Teague, it may be a case of we know what you're going to get with him. And it's not that he's a bad running back whatsoever. He's very talented. He just doesn't have that explosiveness that you saw from Trey Sermon, that you've seen from guys like Ezekiel Elliott and other great running backs, both with Ohio State and around the country. He also doesn't seem to have that vision to hit the hole, or at least not as quickly as some of those other guys. Now, the vision thing can certainly be worked on. That's something that you can review film and whatnot. And I think in that area he can improve and therefore step up. The explosiveness, there's only so much you can do for a guy. Now, last year he was coming off the Achilles injury in the spring. So, maybe he gets some of that back as he, continues to get healthy. But you just saw how different this Ohio State offense looked when Trey Sermon really took over, starting with that Northwestern game when Master Teague suffered a concussion, and then into the playoff, and then how much it regressed, even though Master Teague scored 2 touchdowns in the national championship game. It just wasn't the same. So if Master Teague can't become that guy, they need somebody who can, or some buddies who can. Marcus Crowley is a guy who I think, just in limited carries, I think you see some of that potential there for him to step into that role. He's a guy that also, again, healthy, has a chance this offseason to maybe grab that running back role if he can be that all-around guy that they need, that Trey Sermon was and guys have been in the past. So from that position, those are the two guys that I think have the biggest opportunity to step up, again, not counting the two really highly regarded freshmen coming in.
You got to be careful with comparison statistics, but at the same time, if you look at Ohio State lead backs over the past decade, and you alluded to maybe the top of the line in Ezekiel Elliott, Carlos Hyde, J.K. Dobbins on down the line, they're going to get you 6 yards a carry. They're in that very high 5 yard, and then even spilling into 6.5 yards per carry. And then even the comparison behind the same offensive line, you got Master Teague at 4.9 yards per carry and Trey Sermon at 7.5. And again, if it's a particular game, a stretch of games, I think you need to be careful with the yards per carry comparison. But once you stretch it out to a full season, or what was a full season for the Buckeyes last year and 100+ carries, then I think it's pretty meaningful. Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts, 247 Sports. Pat does a great job coming on here on a regular basis. We appreciate his insight and information in covering Ohio State football, but check out all his work at bucknuts.com. All right, the wide receivers, that seems to be the one position on the field where everybody's pretty comfortable with just the load of talent and the top-end talent, but even at that position, there are some guys who could make that extra leap.
Absolutely. I think that you clearly know what you get from a Chris Olave, a Garrett Wilson. They proved that last year with the numbers they put up. It's those next group of guys that you want to start seeing something from, and specifically what'll be junior Jamison Williams, who is the same class as Garrett Wilson, and had Garrett Wilson, a 5-star one of the top recruits in the country, not been in that class, I think he's probably James Williams probably talked about significantly more coming out of high school, at least in terms of Ohio State's class. And then the freshman wide receivers, there were 4 of them. There's now 3 because Mookie Cooper transferred. But you want to see more from Julian Fleming, G. Scott Jr., and Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think they combined for 16 or 17 total catches as freshmen, and G. Scott didn't catch any passes. So, I think on one level, you want to have more options, right? You don't want to be so reliant on Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, even as talented as they are. You saw with the number of receivers, a team like Alabama, LSU the year before, that when you can spread that ball around, you can really get going. And I think especially with the young quarterback, you're going to want guys that can, you can do some different things with. I also think from a standpoint, like we talked about with the quarterbacks, you've got to keep these guys happy. And remember, there's another group of freshman wide receivers that's coming in behind them. So, you've got to find ways to spread the ball out to these guys. And in order to do that, these guys need to prove that they are able to do all the things that wide receivers need to do, especially the freshmen. They were all so highly touted coming out of high school. And I think, frankly, rather disappointing, a short season for Ohio State, not as much time for some of these guys to get maybe some late game reps to get them used to things. And then you build and you see guys come on. Garrett Wilson did that 2 years ago. But, I still think you expected more from those guys, expected them to earn more playing time and whatnot. And I think with a full offseason this year, those now sophomore wide receivers really have a chance to prove that, hey, that recruiting ranking, those, I think they were all top 10, top 11, something like that in the country coming out of high school, that, hey, that was legit. So, I think that'll be big for the Ohio State offense. And while we're just talking pass catchers, I also think that Jeremy Rucker, who has been a very good player for Ohio State at tight end, now a senior, he could be someone that has to step up because of the new young quarterback. If you have a tight end, Jeremy Rucker was a receiver in high school, a big-bodied receiver, a guy who can go over the middle. That's a fairly routine throw for a young quarterback, and a guy that's rather inexperienced, maybe not used to some of the routes on the outside quite yet. If you have a talented tight end, and Ohio State hasn't used the tight ends a lot, we know that, but that's a position where I could see just statistically maybe Jeremy Rucker takes a bump because he's talented. They haven't used him a ton, but you have a young quarterback, and that's kind of that safety blanket over the middle of the field that you could potentially use early and often in 2021.
Yeah, Jeremy Ruckert's most likely a future NFL player. Only caught 13 passes and 5 touchdowns last year, so obviously his catches meant a whole lot, and we remember the one down the middle against Alabama. Jamison Williams splashed with big plays at 17 yards per catch and 2 touchdowns on only 9 receptions total, but Jackson Smith-Njigba, he seemed to be the guy that stood out in regards to, I don't know if it was the one catch at the back of the end zone where he got the foot down remarkably that nobody really saw because it was so remarkable that nobody thought it was in bounds. And then on the replay, it was like, oh yeah, he did get the ball, the catch in bounds, and then almost caught a touchdown in the national championship game that was certainly up in the air as well. So those are guys obviously to keep on our radar as we look toward the defense, Pat, which of course has gained a lot of ire in the pass defense category. I'm going to guess that you're going to go to the secondary because, my goodness, if there has been a position on the field that's caught some criticism, and justifiably so, but I'll leave it wide open on the defensive side in regards to who could make an impact here in 2021.
Yeah, the secondary is a good place to start, given the fact that they ranked, I think, like 6th to last in the country in pass defense a year ago. No Shaun Wade, and obviously that's a separate conversation about his play last season. But Sevyn Banks is a guy who a lot is expected of. He's going to step into that role as the number 1 cornerback, at least to start spring practice, it looks like. And he was inconsistent, I think, to say, to keep it, to put it lightly, I guess, during 2021. He had some good moments, but too many times he was picked on. And, especially once they started to play really elite teams, he was able to get thrown on. He's a guy that needs to take that next step and become, the top level cornerback. And we've seen Ohio State have guys that have progressed throughout their career and kind of come along slowly. Marshawn Lattimore took a while due to injury. Denzel Ward took a year or two. So, I'm not entirely surprised that it takes some time, especially, again, short off season, didn't have a lot of time to work, new defensive coordinator and defensive backs coach in Kerry Combs. Now, again, he'll have a whole new offseason. But, they need to figure out the entire secondary, not only what they want to do in terms of scheme, and we've touched on that before, but, who's going to be back there along with Sevyn Banks. They've got a lot of young guys, Legend Cavazos, Ryan Watts. There's a handful. Cameron Brown, who I think gets lost in the shuffle because he hurt his Achilles against Penn State in the second game of the season. If he can get back healthy, he's a guy that they were going to rely on. Cameron Martinez in the secondary, and then figure out the safety position, how you want to play that. If you're going to play with one safety or two, is Josh Proctor the guy at that position? And that all depends on guys stepping up. Lathan Ransom was a guy as a freshman last year that stepped up late in the season. How does his offseason go? Does he continue to progress and maybe take on a role in the slot or as a secondary safety? So I think that there's a lot of questions about the secondary, and guys need to step up all over. I wouldn't say there's any one guy that for sure has his spot locked down. If we're looking at the rest of the defense, there's a number of holes that Ohio State has to fill. I mean, 3 starting linebackers that had been starters for years, all gone. Tuff Borland, Baron Browning, and Pete Warner. So all 3 of those have to be filled. And Justin Hilliard, who was kind of that 4th guy, is gone as well. So there's a number of talented players. There's guys that will be seniors in Kayvon Pope, Dallas Gant, Taraja Mitchell, who have waited their chance. And I think they're going to get the first crack. But going back to our theme of stepping up, you've got to step up and take that job because there's a lot of young guys behind Cody Simon, Mitchell Melton. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple guys off the top of my head, Tommy Eichenberg, that are, there and wanting to win a starting job or at least be in kind of a rotation. And that's going to be big. Ohio State the last 2 years has known coming into the season, hey, we've got our linebackers. Maybe the depth increases a little bit because this guy stepped up or this guy stepped up, but you knew who the starting 3 were going to be and what you were going to get out of them. And now you've got to find a new group there. So that'll certainly be interesting to watch. And then at defensive end, you're replacing a guy like Jonathan Cooper, who maybe didn't put up the statistics that Chase Young, Joey, Nick Bosa, that type of guy, but was a true leader for this team, was constantly in the backfield, whether he got the sack or the tackle or not. And so you need to replace that guy. Tyreek Smith came on at the end of the year and played really well, obviously missed the national championship game. But, that's a position. Does Zach Harrison take that next step? He's a guy who was a 5-star kid coming out of high school and looked really good as a freshman, I thought, but didn't seem to have that same level of play last year for whatever reason. So he's a big guy that I think if he steps up and kind of takes on that role that you've seen a Joey, a Nick Bosa, a Chase Young kind of do in their second, third years, then that could be really big for Ohio State at defensive end in terms of getting pressure on quarterbacks.
Tangible production gone, intangible leadership and so forth gone as well. It's just it's really a strange situation across college football when you've got this many unsettled spots on both sides of the football, but the team's this talented and the roster that much more talented than the rest of the conference, and therefore they are again prohibitive favorites in the Big Ten, and to go beyond that and will be a top 5 team in the nation come September. But a lot of holes to fill and very few. We were counting them up on our Ohio State live show the other day, Pat. 5 or 6 spots maybe on both sides of the football out of 20 starters that are really settled that we pretty much know for sure. So it's going to be an interesting offseason for sure. Hopefully, fingers crossed, they get in a full spring practice, a normal summer. Hopefully we'll be able to see some of it, which would be nice in terms of coverage purposes. But yeah, it's a big offseason. I mean, this team, they say they don't rebuild, they just reload. And, that's been the case for Ohio State for a long time. But when you lose this many guys, you've got to kind of, prove that statement. And I think they will. I think that there's plenty of talent on this team to find guys. It's just a matter of getting through it and doing it. And we're going to speculate about it all offseason. That's what we do. And that's what you do. And Pat Murphy at Bucknuts certainly does a great job, and that's why we bring him on here. So catch him for the deep dive, the complete coverage there over on Bucknuts on 247 Sports. Pat, we appreciate you stopping by.
Absolutely. I enjoy it.